Hey, everybody. It's funny, but I really do love Wage Hour. Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Hey, everybody. We're at the end of June. July 4th is coming up. I'm excited. I love the summer. I don't like it being too hot, but I do love it that Ella's out of school. These poor kids, though, I was just thinking about this. They only get 8 weeks of vacation at Ella's school. Literally, they got off on June 10th and they have to go back on August 14th. It just doesn't seem fair. I mean, I always got 3 months of summer vacation. So I don't know. Anyway, we're going to talk about wage hour issues. Some of you are thinking, are you kidding me? Why are we talking about wage hour again? Jen loves to talk about wage hour. Yes, I do love to talk about wage hour because what happens is this is a huge area of potential liability for you. Whether you're a California employer or you're headquartered in another state or another country, wage hour issues are critical in terms of compliance. So we can talk about things like overtime, whether an employee should be classified as exempt or non-exempt. Can you really have an independent contractor? Is somebody taking compliant rest breaks and meal periods? Are they working off the clock? Maybe you're giving them so much work to do and they're feeling so pressured that they're working even when they're not supposed to because you've told them, I don't want to pay any overtime. You've got all this work to do, but I don't want to pay any overtime. So what do? They work off the clock because they want to get it done. Minimum wage. Our minimum wage here in California changes out almost every year. That's the case for many other locations. We also have local cities and counties and municipalities that have different minimum wages. You got to be on top of it. You got to know, when do you care about the minimum wage in a particular jurisdiction, a city or a county, as opposed to the state minimum wage? When do you have to pay somebody their final paycheck, right? How do you process a final paycheck if the payroll department is located somewhere else? And in states like California, you can't automatically do direct deposit. You have to get their approval for direct deposit. So there's so much going on here, folks, in terms of wage hour compliance. Now, the first thing I want you to think about is, how do you even get into this, right? How do you even start thinking about, listen, I know Jen said wage hour is a big deal. I'm going to start focusing on it. What do I do? Well, there are a couple of steps I think you should take. Step number one is I want you to think about, what is the low-hanging fruit, right? And those are the things I just talked about. Things like misclassification, off-the-clock work, not paying final wages on time, not giving people rest breaks and meal periods, right? The wage statement doesn't meet the requirements of whatever law is applicable. In California, we have about 11 requirements that have to be satisfied for a wage statement. So the first thing you've got to do is get a list of things that need to be addressed, right? That you actually need to look at. And we're actually doing a lot of work in this area with our clients where we give them a checklist of just hot topics and say, okay, give us a little bit of input about each of these topics so we can figure out where you are. And then we can help you decide, do you want to do a wage hour audit? Do you want to do a wage statement audit? Do you want to just have a talk about issues that are bugging you? We try to take that preventive approach that is really the foundation of our entire practice and apply it to these wage hour issues that many of us don't want to face, right? We sort of wrinkle our nose and close our eyes and plug our ears and think, oh, I just wish somebody else would deal with this. I actually want to suggest a reframe. I want to suggest that you look at wage hour as a fun puzzle, all right? And you think of this as your opportunity to get in there and figure out, are any of the puzzle pieces missing? Can you get the border done? How are you going to figure out what goes in the inside? All of those kinds of things that you think about when you do a puzzle, right? When you do a puzzle where you might have 1,000 pieces, for example. I want you to really think of it with a different attitude. If we go into it with the negativity and the frustration and, oh, I'm just going to get sued anyway, and this isn't worth it. I mean, in California, as you all know, This year, in January of 2025, we actually got reform to the Private Attorney General's Act, which has made it much easier for employers to get out of lawsuits. It's reduced their penalties, sometimes upwards of 80%. And all you got to do to take advantage of it is look at your wage hour practices. And if you identify any that are problematic, fix them, right? We can do this. We can all do this. So the first thing I want you to realize about how to avoid these problems is, number one, you've got to have a handbook. I know in the old days, many people didn't think they needed handbooks. My very first handbook I ever saw was one for Nordstrom, the retailer. And this was, oh gosh, maybe 2000, 1999. And it had one sentence. It said, do the right thing. And then it was signed by the CEO of the company. Great. That's nice. I love it. Problem is, now we've got all of these requirements. You got to have a rest break and meal period policy. You have to talk about overtime. You have to talk about the different benefits that exempt employees get, those who are not entitled to overtime or rest breaks or meal periods. They're paid generally a fixed salary that doesn't vary based on the quantity or the quality of their work. What benefits do they get? What benefits do the non-exempt or hourly people get, right? How do you deal with on-call and reporting time pay when somebody's being asked to actually wait to see if we need them to come to work? When does that become compensable? When does it not? We only have 15 minutes in this webinar, so I can't go through all of those rules, but I want you to know you got to have them spelled out in your handbook. And this is why you cannot find the free employee handbook that's published in somewhere and use that as your handbook, because it really makes a difference where you're doing business, how you're going to state your policy. In California, for example, there are very specific ways for you to explain your rest break and meal period policy. And when you do that correctly, you can beat a lawsuit. And when you don't, that policy is evidence that you haven't done the right thing. Okay? So you got to write this stuff down. You got to have it in handbooks. Second step, you've got to train your leaders. People have to know. You cannot tell people, hey, don't bill your time today because I'm not supposed to have you work overtime. You can just leave early tomorrow. Doesn't work that way unless there's a negotiated deal with the employee. In certain states like California, you have to reach that agreement in a very specific way. So what I want you to think about is training. And it's not just training for leaders, it's training for everybody. How are you supposed to keep your time? What happens if you have an error in your time? How do you fix it? What happens if somebody interrupts you on a rest break or meal period? What happens if you have to work overnight and you've been working for 23 hours? How do we keep you safe? How do we make sure that you're in connection with your boss or the supervisor or the foreperson, right? That situation's on my mind because it just came up this morning. Somebody asked, we are a manufacturing facility. We are in our busiest time of the year. They're processing fruit and we want to run shifts 24 hours. And sometimes we don't have enough people to do that. So we keep the same employee for 20 hours. Can we do that for 24 hours? Yes. You can, but you've got to pay them appropriately if they're a non-exempt employee, right? If they're entitled to overtime, and then you've got to give them rest breaks and meal periods and do all of those sorts of things. So you got to do training. All right. So number one, you got to have a handbook. You got to have policies. Number two, you got to have training. Number three, you've got to have somebody qualified in your organization who's going to deal with HR issues. I don't care if you have a dedicated HR person. You may not be big enough for that. That's fine. But you've got to have somebody in the organization who understands the law, knows where to find answers if they're confused about some aspect of the law, and can communicate effectively and efficiently with your staff, with your employees, to make sure that everybody understands what the expectations are. This has become incredibly important since COVID. When we talk about folks working at home, we talk about when do they have to come to the office? What equipment do they get? So many different things that can end up being a wage hour issue because they're related to compensation and they may show up on somebody's pay stub. So you have to have somebody handling your human resources functions. Now, I know in many companies, The person handling the human resources functions is going to be an owner. It's going to be somebody who wears 3 different hats. They're the safety manager. They do HR, and they also handle accounts payable and accounts receivable. Okay, I get it. They don't have to be a dedicated person, but that has to be somebody who you know you can trust, that if they don't have the information, they will go find it. If they don't have the resource, they will seek it out. If they're not sure how to communicate with an employee, they'll get some advice, okay? So that's going to be important. Okay, so we've got handbooks, we've got training, we've got somebody dedicated to HR. The fourth thing I want you to think about, all right, is where your risk tolerance is. Because the truth of the matter is, when it comes to wage hour, you are probably not going to be able to do everything exactly by the book. You just can't. There are so many restrictions and so many requirements in many, many jurisdictions, not just California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, I mean, all over the place. The UK, France, right? Africa, they've all got rules here. Mexico, all rules. I want you to think about, okay, how am I going to make sure that I understand what the expectations are? So you've got to decide where you're going to take the risk, because you really can't do this 100% perfectly. What I think is important for clients is to take a knowing risk, right? Something where you understand, where could I possibly go astray here? Where am I possibly going to have some problems? If you can do that, if you can make a knowing analysis of your risk, then when something happens, you're prepared, right? You know what's going on. So for example, I have some clients who've decided, listen, I don't want to pay for a minute of overtime. So, but I'm still going to schedule people for 8 hours. And if they don't clock out after 8 hours, then I'm going to round their time. I'm going to make sure that I'm using time rounding so I don't have to pay that minute of overtime or 2 minutes of overtime. I've told those same clients, look, the California Supreme Court said in See's Candy, the most recent See's Candy decision, that there's no reason to actually round anymore. It's really all about depriving your employees of overtime, because the truth is, it's that we almost all use electronic timekeeping at this point. So we just don't need to be rounding. But you may decide, you know what, Jen, I'm going to do it. I think it's a small risk. It's important to me. I'm going to do it. Okay, you get to make that decision. One of the things that I do as a lawyer is I never tell employees what to do. I will always answer their questions, and I will give them the pros and cons of the approach they want to take or the one they're considering. I'll make a recommendation based on the balance, the sort of cost benefit analysis, the risk balance that I think they may want to make. But in the end, it is their decision. And I think that is a mistake that a lot of lawyers make. We get too tied up in our ego and we want people to listen to our advice. It doesn't matter if they listen to your advice. In HR, you guys listen. If they don't want to do what you're telling them to do, jot it down and move on, right? Keep your documentation. I do. I take notes of every phone call I have with a client. But the truth of the matter is, there are going to be some places that you're going to want to take some risk. And you may want to talk to your internal folks as part of that process. Where do we want to take the risk? Where are we willing to maybe be a little more aggressive? Make that decision on a global level, because that's important, and make it collectively so that everybody's on the same page. That's a great way to go. And if you decide that you're going to take the risk, you take the risk and everybody moves on. Okay, there's just no way to do it perfectly. Everybody listen, I love wage hour. I think it's like a recipe, like baking. Okay, my daughter, Ella, is an amazing baker. I mean, truly, she's amazing. And when I watch her follow baking recipes, she follows them to the T, right? She levels off the flour. She levels off the baking soda. When we make dinner, when we cook, and we're just pulling things out of the fridge to make a burrito bowl, measuring or weighing, we're not doing anything like that. We throw it all together and make ourselves a burrito bowl. So wage hour is like baking. It's precise. It's precision. Okay. So you've got to have the policy, the training, you got to have the people, and you've got to know your risk tolerance. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me. It's always an honor and privilege. Keep up the good work and just enjoy these beautiful days. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others. Post about it on social media and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.